Well, I guess I'm going to have to do a part 2 to Zeitgeist Debunked. Okay. And we're going to start back with the Belt of Orion. Okay. Now, here's the deal with the Belt of Orion. Now, I've done enough tourism stuff in my lifetime that when you have a sign that's supposed to point to something, the sign is very specific. It says, hey, look, this is exactly where it's supposed to be pointing to. Okay? And the sign and what it's pointing to are at the, well, they're pretty close to each other. Okay? That way you know that the sign is specifically pointing to that thing and not something else. Alright, now, if the Belt of Orion descends below the horizon before the sun comes up, how can the Belt of Orion point to the sun? It can't. They say, well, it points east. Well, I have lots of signs here that point east. Shoot, if you're from my position, you point east, you could look in New York, or Washington, D.C., or Georgia. So when it points east, doesn't mean specifically that it points to the sun. It could be pointing to another star. To make an assertion that the Belt of Orion points to the sun at a specific point, remember, this Belt of Orion points east all the time. That's right. For the entire time that it's actually up on the horizon when we can actually see it, it still points east. There's nothing significant about December 25th. So there goes that argument. Argument number 2. We have to go back to the three kings. I didn't think I'd have to go back to this, but I guess I will. Alright, so where did they get the idea for the 3 kings? Certainly wasn't from the Bible. You open up that Bible and you find out that the Magi were never kings. And there weren't just 3 of them. Let me tell you something. They were carrying gold, frankincense, and myrrh. For anybody that has an analytical mind and knows anything about the Judean desert, back at that time where they had lots of bandits, you didn't go out with 3 guys and see just how fast you'd get robbed. Didn't happen that way. These Magi were sorcerers. Okay? They weren't kings, they were sorcerers. Name me the land that they were kings of. Okay, you got 3 kings. What lands are they kings of? They can't tell you that. Because they don't know. That's how stupid they are. So like I said, when you're talking about Zeitgeist here, they never list what territories these guys are supposed to be kings of. They can't prove that they were even kings at all. They can't prove that there was 3 of them. Now you say, well, whoa, there was 3 of them. Really? You know where that came from? It came from a song called We 3 Kings of Orient Are. Do you know where that song came from? Prior to 1857, that song didn't even exist. Oops. Yes, the song was created by a guy named John Henry Hopkins Jr. He was a reverend. And he thought it'd be just kind of a cool little song, so he invented We 3 Kings of Orient Are. He didn't have any way to justify that these guys were kings. He couldn't tell you which territories they were kings of, because they weren't really kings. And he couldn't even tell you that there was 3 in number, because the Bible never lists it. He was just going by the number of gifts, which, by the way, I don't think really were gifts. Okay? Now, they were gifts to Jesus, but I don't think they started out as gifts. That's the key. I think these Magi not only were sorcerers, but were also merchants, and they were selling frankincense and myrrh, which were very valuable, and they were getting gold for it. That's why they were carrying gold with them. They probably just got through with a deal. They sold a bunch of frankincense and myrrh, got the gold, went on, found Jesus. So like I said, I don't think they were really intended to be gifts. They ended up being gifts, but they didn't start out that way. More than likely what happened was there was this band of 20 or so Magi well armed with swords, ready to take on any bandit that showed up. And they happened to see the star in the east, which, by the way, was not Sirius. It had nothing to do with the Belt of Orion. None of it. That's all debunked. Okay? They saw something, but it wasn't that. Now, I'm sure they knew about the Belt of Orion. They knew about Sirius. Now, the thing is that if Sirius and the Belt of Orion was so significant to these magi, okay, then they could have seen it at any old time. This star, the star over Bethlehem, which, by the way, Bethlehem does mean house of bread. But the significance of that has nothing to do with what they were talking about. The significance of that is that Jesus was the bread of life. Well, where do you go get the bread of life? From the house of bread. That's the only significance. Another one debunked. Okay. Now, I looked up the story of Osiris and Horace and Isis, and there are so many versions of this dang thing, I'm not even sure how Horace actually died. Just take your pick. There are stories about how Osiris, which could have been Horace, we're not really sure, might have been drowned, might have been stung by a scorpion. There's so many versions of the dang thing, you don't even know how Horace died, if he even died. See what I mean? It's ridiculous. Okay, now let's continue with the debunking here. 12 disciples. We don't even know how many disciples Horace had. It doesn't really list. Depends on what version of the story you want to go by. Now, thing is, there were 12 distinct followers of Jesus. That's true. But they were even more distinct than you think. These followers of Jesus had careers. What were the careers of Horace's disciples? Are they ever mentioned? Nope. Okay? Now, if you're going to give careers to followers, wow. Fishermen, a.k.a. Peter, Matthew the tax collector, a Pharisee named Paul. Now, granted, Paul did not follow Jesus at the time that Jesus was given his 3-year ministry, but later on he became an apostle. Okay, so Paul, we know he was a tent maker. We know that he was once a Pharisee and he killed a whole bunch of Christian converts. Okay, we know all of this. We know a lot about these disciples that later became apostles. We know all this. But let me tell you something. When it comes to Paul, even though he didn't directly follow Jesus during his ministry, I'm sure that Paul heard all the stories. He knew quite well what Jesus stood for, all this other stuff. All Paul had to do was meet with all these disciples and apostles that he would have been told all these stories, so he knew all of this. When you're talking about Luke, Luke was not one of the followers of Jesus during the ministry of Jesus. That's true. However, as Luke became an apostle himself, okay, we know he was a doctor, we know he followed Paul, so on and so forth. We know a lot of information about Luke. We even know that Luke had a Gentile name. And there's a possibility that Luke also had a Jewish name. How do we know this? Because Paul started out as a Jew and became a Christian convert. I suspect that Luke was Paul's doctor before Paul became converted. Now, if that being the case, then a Jewish man would never have been doctored by a Gentile doctor. Okay? And if that being the case, then that would make Luke a Jew, not a Gentile. Who ever thought about that? So, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of arguments about that. Go ahead and argue with me all you want. But that would be a logical conclusion. Anyway, so if we're going to focus on these 12 disciples, where did they get the careers from? Horace never really lists the careers of the 12 people that supposedly followed him. And keep in mind, that was 12 distinct followers. A lot more than 12 people followed Jesus. Maybe not every day of his 3-year ministry, but they followed Jesus. So, there goes that argument right down the toilet bowl. Okay? What about crucifixion? Now you got to keep in mind that the story of Horace goes back to the Egyptian tombs. Now the Egyptian tombs were around a lot longer than crucifixion. Crucifixion is first mentioned in 519 BC. It seems there was this king known as Darius, and Darius crucified 3,000 Babylonians in 519 BC. Now, if crucifixion was back in 519 BC, and those Egyptian tombs were back a lot longer than that, then how did they get the story of Horace being crucified? It didn't happen that way. And like I said, I tried to trace down how Horace actually died, if he even died. Good luck. Okay, how about Alexander the Great? Now the thing is, now these people say, well, Horace was crucified. They don't give a specific story and say, hey, okay, according to this X and Y book, which talks about the complete story of Horace, this is where they list the crucifixion. This is how it was done. Okay? And notice here, that Horace wasn't flogged. He was crucified, but he was supposedly crucified, but he wasn't flogged. So how does that compare to Jesus? Jesus was flogged first, then crucified. And where's the blasphemy trial? Not mentioned at all in Horace. Now here's another kick. Alexander the Great also did crucifixions. He crucified 2,000 citizens of the city of Tyre. Now, here's the interesting point about Babylon and Tyre. Babylon is in modern-day Iraq. Okay? Now, if you trace Tyre and Sidon, they're not that close to Egypt. So how did the incorporation of crucifixion get into the story of Horace? They don't mention that. Zeitgeist never mentions this. So there you go. So, if crucifixion originated in Babylon, moved to Tyre and Sidon, and then finally moved to Egypt, how did Horace get crucified? Doesn't make any logical sense. There you go. Now, the final note about these kind of crucifixions is that they were designed to crucify slaves or military enemies. Now, the Romans considered Jesus a military enemy. He was an insurrectionist too dangerous to live. Well, what army crucified Horace as an insurrectionist too dangerous to live? Zeitgeist doesn't mention this because it's not there. So see, if you think about a lot of things that I'm trying to tell you, you begin to realize how stupid this whole thing sounds. Now I know for all of you, and I'm going to look this up here real quick because I know you guys, I know what you're going to do. You're going to ask me where Tyre is. Hang on. Okay. Tyre is in Lebanon. Okay. Now Lebanon is real close to Israel. Alright. And yeah, it's actually, it looks like it's just north of Israel. Okay, so we got Tyre, Lebanon, which is north of Israel. Which would make sense because if crucifixion came from Babylon, it'd go through Lebanon, hit Jerusalem, then hit Egypt. So, where does Horace get crucified? Answer me. There you go. Whole thing is just completely debunked. By just a few simple pieces of logic, you get it. Alright, hopefully I won't have to do a part 3 on Zeitgeist Debunked. I will if I have to. I will tell you more in a future video. Stay tuned.